Welcome to the Katchr Podcast. Today's guest is Alex McPherson, founder of Ignition Law. Ignition are an award-winning specialised SME law firm designed deliberately to operate differently from traditional legal practice. Alex has built Ignition as a hybrid firm, combining a core London team with a flexible consultant model. And the firm focuses heavily on business development discipline, recurring revenue products, structured risk management, and thoughtful experimentation with legal technology. So, Alex, welcome.
Thanks so much, Graham. Flattered to be on the podcast.
Yeah, so great to have you here. I want to start with something small but possibly revealing. So, you don't call your senior lawyers rainmakers, you call them drizzle makers. So that feels deliberate. What does that word choice tell us about how you think about building your firm?
We're trying to build a firm with a sense of empowerment, and that was born originally out of high performance talent, which often was consultant lawyers. And one of the areas that's important in legal services and going to be all the more important is having a sense of business development acumen and a sense of drive and a desire to do that. By removing that bifurcation of are you or are you not a rainmaker, you can really encourage really important positive behaviour. People bringing in maybe a £5,000 client to 7,000, and actually as their confidence builds, they realise they're doing it for themselves. About an hour ago, a colleague that joined about 2.5 years ago brought in working with her old boss at a big Canadian firm that's now a kind of partner firm, a really interesting piece of disputes work. My reaction was obviously it's great that she's done that and it's profitable and it's going to be, big ticket work for us. But very genuinely, it's as fulfilling that her confidence has grown, and she's, I labelled it in an email back to say this is you building your own practice, and that's fantastic. So I think we use that term to really talk to the value in somebody growing as a lawyer and a future leader. And whilst the economics are obviously different, if somebody's got, a £250,000 practice, there are ways you can reward and support somebody that's maybe bringing in smaller bits of work. And it's about that work, but it's also about the confidence and the growth in mindset that comes with it.
Yeah, okay, and that seems to me to be sort of part of your culture, and culture is very much about behaviours. So, what particular behaviours are you looking to sort of reward?
Definitely a sense of being collegiate. I think that's really, really important, and a sense of responsiveness, kindness, technical acumen. But I think one area that's a challenge, challenge that we haven't by any means finished cracking is candor. Is giving somebody feedback and it being a kinder, nicer, better thing to do as a senior lawyer to have difficult conversations earlier with clients, with colleagues. And that's definitely a work in progress that I think a lot of us lawyers, you aren't taught management skills and they have to evolve and grow. So that's an area we're always trying to work on. We have 6 values that spell the word scale: sourcing, cultivating, assisting, leading, evangelizing, and delivering. Delivering, if you like, the first 3, SC and DR, finding, minding, grinding in old parlance. Assisting and leading really it's being collegiate, assisting and leading, being very proactive. It's much better to have taken a view, got an email out to a client proactively than to have overthought it and taken too long. And then the E is a sense of trying to build a personal brand, evangelizing.
Yeah, okay, and it comes across really clearly that you think deeply about what you want your firm to be like. If somebody was designing a modern law firm from scratch today, what are the key things that you absolutely wouldn't copy from a traditional firm?
For us, where the market we're trying to crack is bringing lawyers back to law, encouraging people to kind of run their own businesses and practice law. Often their own businesses have got nothing to do with law, and our clients love that because you have very technical lawyers that are working in very much in the real world with their own cash and risk and all the rest of it. So the things that we would deliberately avoid if we were restarting again are probably more of a traditional LLP structure. One way to construe an LLP, and as I say, this is only my view for what we're trying to achieve, is some of the problems with the LLP model are you have a points-based system and there's almost an incentive to get as high as you can, do well as an equity partner and maybe retire, and sometimes there are obligations that you have to retire at a certain age, and those things probably aren't as helpful for how we're trying to work. with a core team of lawyers, a training program for junior lawyers, and bringing a lot of lawyers who want to work flexibly back to work. For us, the kind of structure is quite important. An ABS law firm becoming a B Corp is definitely something that would be the right choice for what we're trying to do. Recruitment, to be honest, as BD and the clients, it's a very important sort of tool and yardstick for recruitment. I think the other things that would be important if we were starting again that we would go down the road of are flexible working, and that jars with a lot of business models where there's a huge amount of logic to maybe having a lawyer doing 1,400 hours a year on PAYE, sat on a seat, and that's different to ours. You trade profitability per capita for perhaps slightly more entrepreneurial spirit. These kind of smaller practices spread across the firm. So for us, that then means you have to have a lot of technology, very efficient ways of onboarding clients and giving them a good experience for smaller matters, calculating costs very quickly and clearly. I think the things that are very important as well, if we're doing again, that we do earlier, if you like, a cocktail of pricing, so fixed, value driven subscription pricing can be hugely powerful, and then hourly rates. In reality, whilst there's a lot of talk, hourly rates dead, it's still a key metric of efficiency and growth and what lawyers are doing. So I think we would probably be braver about going to market earlier with a mix of pricing strategies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you sort of started out, it's a case of horses for courses. You decided the type of firm that you want, and that drives a lot of the very conscious decisions you've made. Incentives are something that people always talk about when building a practice and recruiting lawyers. So what incentives did you or have you deliberately redesigned at Ignition? What do you do differently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's two models, as many other firms have as well. There's people that are working on a PAYE basis, where they have clear goals, and that world is one of actually relatively low quantum with a nice work-life balance on the basic metrics of 1,000 billable hours a year, where in some ways it's less efficient because you have lots more clients, but the firm is more diversified in terms of risk. And so there are those incentives for lawyers on PAYE that is a basic goal, and then contractual obligations uplifts if lawyers exceed that. Generous incentives around welfare and health and private medical insurance, dental insurance, all sorts of things that are partly important for being a B Corp, but also to supporting a happy, balanced life. Incentives around recruitment, encouraging people to refer in friends, colleagues, their own clients, as we were talking about. So there's that world of incentives. And then on the consultancy side, like many other firms, there's a very clear percentage for bringing your own business and working on your own business. But in our case, also a different incentive for cross-referring it around the firm so that people can drive that. The other thing we've lent into quite heavily is a partnership referral scheme where people maybe are wanting to refer legal business to a firm that they feel is aligned to them and want to either know that their contacts are looked after with a fee discount, maybe a fee share, clear monthly reporting of what we're doing, and that we won't tread on toes if we're asked to do certain matters. And then setting KPIs, so we have different people who have really clear goals as to what they want to achieve during the year, whether it's going for certain awards or whether it's delivering milestones on website performance, LinkedIn, community engagement, number of clients coming in, AI and technology milestones. Getting Cyber Essentials was an important step for us this year. E Corp a couple of years ago now. So there are sort of different milestones that are really clear, and then we reward accordingly.
Yeah. So that's essentially a tailored program for each individual, depending on
Exactly.
their own goals and ambitions, as well as the firm's.
Yes, exactly that.
So how would you say you balance loyalty and long-term thinking, which is obviously important to you, against the sort of growth of the business, which can sometimes encourage short-term thinking?
Well, I think it starts with recruitment, and you only get that right by getting it wrong in reality in most small businesses. And that takes quite a long time to really work out what's right. So I think being clear about alignment and Jim Robbins' point of who's on the bus and who's not on the bus, being really meticulous with that and thinking who sat where on the bus, and being quick where people aren't perhaps the right cultural fit, or the two non-negotiables, and those go to integrity and transparency. So there's two that we're kind of ideally, we're weirdly candid and straightforward and transparent in our approach, our comms, because entrepreneurs are you, and that's what's fun about working with them. You get much more direct feedback, and you know exactly where you stand. So those are key values that we look for on the way in, and are quite meticulous with that, the recruitment process and cultural fit. And then hopefully that works, for the long term in terms of loyalty and engagement. I think you're right. How do you balance loyalty against fast growth? Slowed our growth the last couple of years. I think you go through stages of growth in a law firm. You can go super quick. You run more risks of breaking things and losing people. So I think we've gone through a sensible period of slow organic growth where we've put in place lots of different pillars, from technology to recruitment to thinking through our data stack and cyber essentials, becoming a B Corp, building out quite a lot of stuff that we need on the client journey, the website engine, subscription products, and now we're at this stage of really kind of pushing forwards slightly quicker growth. And I think being clear about who's coming in and what the values are, being clear that you've invested quite aggressively in all the right things under the bonnet, to the point that it hurts margin. You need to have proper risk management and IT infrastructure, etc. Those are really important things to do. And then I think to share the challenges, to share this is what we're doing, this is our margin, this is our speed of growth, that hopefully retains that loyalty and support as you do start pushing a little bit more quickly in the growth department.
Yeah. It's interesting what you should say about the IT and working with entrepreneurs, because as an entrepreneur that's grown a tech business, it's sometimes difficult to find lawyers who actually identify with some of your priorities. So it's good to hear. We've talked a bit in the past about business development, and I'm really interested in some of the initiatives that you've taken. What's often interesting is things that have not worked so much. So are there things you've tried on the BD side that haven't worked? What's possibly the most expensive lesson you've learned over the years in terms of what you've tried to do?
Yeah, I'd say the most expensive thing is not really listening, not listening well enough. That's always a route to ruin. And definitely our learning now. For instance, there's a chap that joined us not so long ago, about a year ago, and when he joined, very impressive, agile lawyer. He was very clear that he didn't have a business case, and ironically now he's doing really well with BD, but actually being really clear on the way and what is it you want to do and what do you not want to do, how many hours do you want to work, how do you want to work. I think having those conversations really candidly, especially around BD, does somebody actually want to do it or not, allows you to be clear whether you've got somebody that wants to source work, as we call it, bring it in afresh, or somebody that wants to cultivate, do a great job looking after clients, running work. And it's often missed that introverts make amazing business development lawyers. Somebody yesterday won a huge piece of work that was purely by virtue of doing a fantastic job and being very good technically and responsively. And that's still BD. That's the Pareto principle of 80% of your stuff coming from pre-existing clients. Your most expensive lesson probably was racing into responding to an email from someone a couple of years ago who was in the market, wanted a job, was a head of BD, joined us, fantastic person, now a client, doing brilliantly. And that was our failing, not that person's failing at all, but effectively the version of BD they'd been doing was more reacting to very large clients in an institution where it was inbound BD, which is a very different thing to what perhaps you do and we do of running around, banging the drum and bringing things in. But I think, the biggest mistake we made was jumping straight in at the deep end, probably not listening enough. And yes, it was a strategic mistake in terms of having a BD head with less direct experience, but I think it also was a recruitment mistake by not being extra fussy on thinking through candidates and taking longer to get someone in. I think that and the last point on that as well, it's definitely a lesson we've learned, which, if it's helpful for anyone, is people that join and want to take 3-4 months to kind of get to know the business and ease in. That's been quite a common mistake our end, for kind of non-fee earning roles that maybe they want to take a few months to get to know the business. Often that correlates with frustration as people not knowing what that person's doing and what the deliverables are. And that's about KPIs, I guess.
Yeah. So there is always this sort of tension between what you can do in-house and what you can outsource. And BD and in the sort of marketing side within law firms, there's often the question as to what you do there. What are your current thoughts and what are your recent experiences?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the work you do is fantastic, and that Katchr does, and it's very important. We've had some disasters where we tried to code bits ourselves um, and hit some limits. I mean, on BD, what to do in-house, what to outsource. I think obviously there's a recruitment point, there's an in-house point of the right sorts of lawyers with the right sorts of skills that it's very hard to teach, really hard to teach. I think you can influence it a little bit, but that's sort of often an in-house point, getting those roles and incentives correct. One of the things we've tried to do well in-house is track clients and leads, so building out some simple software that meticulously tracks everything. What's coming in? Have we responded? Fee earners, have we gone back? Yes or no? And actually knowing that we're doing that exercise is transformative, and it's a really kind of sensible discipline. And you build a data stack of inquiries, and even being aware what comes in, what time of the year, etc. Things that are better outsourced, I think, for us on that front have certainly been marketing advice, SEO, Geo as we call it now, with featuring on ChatGPT and Gemini and all the kind of key engines to make sure that you're properly placed. I think that's an area that is hugely turns on expertise like yours, Graham, where you certainly don't know in the day job as a lawyer why. In our case, we perform quite well on ChatGPT, coming out, at the top or very near the top for searches like which firm should I use for entrepreneurs and SMEs, but actually, those are very niche skills that fundamentally go to BD. We have a very good marketing agency, Conscious, that help us on a lot of these things, and thinking about the website and how to make it efficient, how to keep it optimal. So that those skills, I think there's a happy connection of my colleague Tammy that leads us on those internally and what we think we want. But also Karen, who's an internal marketeer here, but actually nudging up against proper expertise of what's appropriate in the market.
Yeah, as you're growing as a business, there's only so much internal expertise you can really get when you need absolute expertise. That's
Exactly.
right. So moving on to your sort of pricing models, and we sort of touched on this very briefly, but you're very interested in recurring revenue in legal services. What sort of turned you on to that, and how have you evolved your thinking over the years in terms of recurring revenue pricing for the legal services that you provide?
I think there's sort of two answers in the market to that. There's, a lot of people would make the point that it adds the value of the firm. Law firms are more predictable revenues, sticky revenues, recurrent revenues are more attractive in a world where there's lots and lots of interest in firms, and for us, it's not so much that, it's more diversification in revenue and stability of revenue and growth. So for our model, where maybe you've got somebody that's perhaps coming back to law with an amazing CV that as we were saying earlier, perhaps hasn't got a huge practice yet, or is still building that practice and that confidence, wrongly because they're brilliant, but they want support to get there. That sort of a person combined with an SME, it's a really nice synergy for recurring revenue. Purely because if that lawyer's working, say, 15 hours a week, fluxing, but there or thereabouts, they want to work, and they want to do it around children or another business, actually getting to know, Katchr, this is how you like to work, this is how you operate, these are the business priorities. That's kind of why we all do it. That's why a lot of us have taken pay cuts compared to the city to work with exciting SMEs. You really get to know people, you make a real difference. You get lovely emails when you're getting folks sorted on disputes or through funding rounds or M&A, whatever it might be. So it makes it more interesting and a deeper relationship for the lawyer. You can add an awful lot more value. Clients tend to love it because they've got much more predictability, on what they're spending. They can budget properly. You can sort of maybe delay your staff handbook 3 months because you've got another project for now. So it's quite a nice, predictable relationship for the lawyer, for the SME. And ultimately for us, it's smaller firms. We still absolutely suffer from it, but smaller firms in particular, it's quite unnerving where maybe you go from, what, 1.5 million turnover 1 year to 1.3. There's a lot of things that have to change in that business to accommodate that shrinkage. So I think our strategy has been to offer clients more choice as to how they want legal services doing. Predictability is quite key in that area.
As a business owner, predictability is really important to me, and it often surprises me that a lot of lawyers, like law firms, don't necessarily recognise that. There's almost the assumption that the value that's being delivered is the time that's being spent. But actually, you're running a business, all you really want to know is what's my expenses going to be over the next months, years to achieve this goal, and that has a lot of extra value over and above the actual legal advice that's given. So, yeah, it sounds to me like there's a lot of opportunity there. Have you found that that's particularly attractive?
Yes, I think it's taken a long time to get it right. So one of the things that we got wrong was we initially weren't flexible enough around we're operating a use it or lose it approach. And that was definitely a mistake. It's hindsight seems really obvious, but now there's much more flexibility on clients taking out a package rolling forwards. If they need more things doing, they get a lovely discount depending on the quantum of the retainer, but also when they run over for wider legal services, the clients sort of feel quite rightly they're being rewarded, and that's been great. But I think that the learning points were actually making sure clients do lock in for a 6 month minimum and actually commit. And then that's worked really well.
Would you say it requires additional discipline to make the retainers work from your perspective?
Yeah, there's definitely rules and bumper lanes you have to have in place, to kind of make sure the relationship runs smoothly. Really good reporting and really clear terms at the start to kind of explain how it's going to work. I think one area we could probably do a little bit more on is a central line manager that's really checking in on the relationship objectively.
There's a risk on both sides, I suppose, with that, but you're trying to manage that. But thinking more broadly about risk as your firm grows, what would you say keeps you up at night from a risk perspective these days?
Well, touch wood, we've never had a claim, and that's obviously something that firms are really nervous about. We've done a lot of work on AML. We've got 2 risk management committees, and we are really OCD on risk and risk mitigation and having a really positive culture. I think we're quite bullish on the FCA coming in because I think we're quite happy with how we reconcile client accounts and don't drive any revenue from interest and things like that. I think there are definitely challenges from the concern of clients around fee earners notifying where they've gone over on scopes. That's definitely an area that's important, and the SRA are looking at how you deal with articulation of costs and overrun, and that's a perpetual issue to keep on top of. So that's definitely an area of nerves. We definitely are keeping abreast on tech. The idea of a cyber hack, and that's something that we're really, really cautious on. We kind of effectively simplified our data stack, so everything's in Azure 365 with very tight logins there, and then a very good CTO and a very good contract with an outsourced IT company that look after it really carefully with a sensible strategy. But then there's a separate stack which is our practice management system. So I think we've tried to kind of simplify those areas because they are ever higher on risk. AI is coming in, you have to keep abreast of that, obviously, but AI is going to land with drafting is still evolving quite significantly, and how it impacts junior training in the future, these are uncertainties. But overall, just keeping on the pulse with that. We've given a couple of desks to a client and a really great AI business called Legal Engine that are in the office, and they're helping us keep a bit of a ear to the ground on what's going on. They're doing quite a niche area of agentic AI, but that's not a bad thing to have lawyers and technologists sort of all in close proximity, so you don't fall behind. As they say, I don't think AI will replace all lawyers, but it'll replace lawyers that don't use AI.
Yeah, and things are moving so fast, as you say, ear to the ground is so important. One of the things that you briefly touched on earlier, but it fascinated me when we last spoke, that you're getting inbound work from the LLMs, essentially. Did that surprise you? And if so, what particularly surprised you about it?
It really did. And I don't, maybe I'm a little bit behind the curve, but I think anyone that claims to fully know exactly how GEO works, with LLMs, even our agency are being totally honest that it's very evolving, so it definitely surprised us. It pleasantly surprised us. I was at a meeting in Cambridge yesterday and did a check on ChatGPT, and we were doing brilliantly for SMEs and entrepreneurs. And so those, we've always done well on SEO, but not necessarily quite that well. So I think where you've genuinely got a niche and a focus and a clear mission and presumably lots of metadata and Chambers rankings and all sorts of stuff that is very genuinely pointing in one direction. I think the LLMs have ingested that. It's worked very well with that niche. And the surprise on it actually is a lady starting with us in a couple of weeks' time, super impressive lawyer, commercial lawyer, and she came and found us entirely via Gemini. So she had a couple of job offers, but had happened upon the firm entirely by way of Gemini, applied with a very impressive CV. Those sorts of things, obviously, it's still happen a bit with Google, but I think it's really gone up a level in terms of verification. And maybe the final thing on that is also that it's got pros and cons, but clients are slightly self-serve. So a chap came on board as a client about 6 weeks ago, and he built his own mini LLM for quite a tricky piece of legal advice. Got to the end of what he felt comfortable doing and effectively handed it over to us. So you it might be cannibalizing a little bit of the work, but I think actually you open up to more people, and there are definitely lots of challenges with clients that maybe haven't been able to read in and understand their own case, and there's more cost inefficiency there. So AI is allowing people to come with ideas and thoughts, and and maybe just join you at a slightly different point on the journey in a few areas where they've maybe tried to self-serve. An area of challenge, and I know the regulators are all concerned about as well, is use of AI to draft very clever emails in terms of complaining about fees or raising issues. And so there's definitely a huge amount more pressure on firms to kind of put sensible resources in internally to investigating files and taking anything really seriously, where your clients are a lot more nimble in terms of being able to draft really sensible emails. It's just an area of lookout, I suppose. And the AI is a little bit more lopsided there, where we're having to deal with anything in quite a manual way, as all firms are. So that's an area of challenge, I think.
That's interesting. That's something that I've not come across before. But certainly, yeah, in terms of clients coming to you potentially more prepared, does that make the first conversation for you easier? Does it elevate the actual value and quality of the work that you're doing because some of the more trivial stuff is already done?
I think so. I mean, it's an area of evolution to start thinking a bit more about value-driven pricing. If somebody's saying, I've drafted an employment contract, can you quickly check it, and I only want to pay half an hour of your time rather than maybe 2 or 3 hours to draft it all. On the one hand, you're taking on a huge amount more risk. It's often pretty inefficient to quickly check nothing's missing. So there are challenges there, how you interact. Other way of looking at that is you may be, instead of advising on one employment contract, which is 3 to 4 hours work, you maybe are doing an hour's work, an hour and a half's work in a slightly different way, but charging a premium. So there's definitely evolution on those sorts of things. Areas of such as due diligence, are really were not things one enjoys as a trainee back in the day, but actually those are getting easier and more interesting in terms of how AI can help. But it's a challenge.
And what are your thoughts on how that will evolve? Is it going to widen the gap between sort of more tech-driven firms and more traditional firms?
It's a really good question, and I imagine you've got a view on it. I'd love to know your thoughts. I think there's almost several different types of firm, aren't there? There's very large legal 50 star firms that are maybe putting a lot of time, effort, money, resource into building their own technology, and they're doing it at that quite significant scale, often around what their clients need and want. So if you're acting for, a load of top FTSE insurers, probably are building out a very niche product for your own client base. So there's those sorts of elements which are interesting and innovative. The bulk of firms, the mid-market firms that are clients, consumers, and then a lot of the country's firms are 1, 2, 3-person shops that are much smaller and very different price points. I think one of the challenges definitely with law tech and AI at the moment is huge valuations, and consequently it's very expensive. So you ultimately have to come back to the simple elements of the business model, that if in crude terms you're paying the lawyers, let's say being paid a third of what was being charged to a client in whatever guise it's being charged, and the firm's got roughly a third cost, and you've got maybe a third gross profit, oversimplifying it. The problem is often AI solutions are costing 25, 30%. So you've got, even if you could just remove the lawyer and AI does everything, all you've kind of done is swapped out some wooden dollars effectively. And so often AI is that the challenge is you've got law technology businesses that are often loss making. They've got a lovely big valuation and they need to get the business sold. So there's going to be an awful lot of consolidation. So in a way, I think there will be AI consolidated in the kind of key providers, and one has to be a little bit careful what solutions one adopts, what the terms are. A friend that runs an AI business is super careful, even in his business, not to sign up 12-month term contracts with suppliers because it's evolving so quickly.
Yeah, and if any of us had a crystal ball, it would be amazing because, as you say, things are changing so fast. It's fascinating and frightening, I think, in equal amounts. So, just move on to a few just rapid fire questions, just to finish off. What would you say is the best 10K you've spent in the business?
That's a good question. I would say it's got to be a combination of building some of our own law tech that tracks clients, and then referral bonuses, where people introduce friends and family, because often those are brilliant hires where they've been pre-vetted.
Yeah. Recommendations, I think, in any aspect of business are always the best starting point. What would you say is one belief about legal services that you've changed your mind on since you set the business up?
That's a great question. I would say that when I came to law, it was a traditional industry. You're in-house, you're private practice, your partner, you're not. And we have an awful lot of incredible women in the firm that are very empowered, doing law many which ways. So this notion that laws are, and I briefly left the law for a few months, I was a bit disillusioned as a junior lawyer. So this idea that it's a stuffy, it's traditional, it's very set in its ways, I just don't think it's true. And a lot of people will still carry disillusionment about law. I think it's a really cool career that you can drive, a very nice, comfortable life on. You can do in many different ways now. And if you embrace technology, it's actually one of the most exciting, progressive careers going.
Yeah, it's certainly changed a lot in the 30 odd years that I've been on the periphery looking in to the legal sector. As you say, there's so many more opportunities now. So just briefly bringing it back to sort of subject very close to my heart. What would you say is one metric in your business that you watch weekly without fail?
I'm always all over what the number of billable hours, as I say, whether it's subscription, whether it's fixed, whatever it is, there is a metric ultimately of X per week, and I'm always keeping an eye on that. And we've got different eyes on different places, credit control, onboarding clients, but I'd say I'm always keep an eye on that. How busy are we currently? And we're normally sort of 10 to 15 new clients a week. That's the metric that excites me. Obviously, our clients are smaller SMEs, but those are the ones I never take my eye off.
Okay. And finally, if you were rebuilding from scratch tomorrow, what would you prioritize first?
I'd say brand is really important. The values around culture, but unquestionably the key leaders in the business. We're very lucky. We've got fantastic leaders and operations and finance team, and I think those key stakeholders drive everything. So I think that's an area to always get right.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So we're just about out of time, Alex. That's been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And Yeah, to everyone listening, if you found today valuable, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Graham.